A rich woman decided to humiliate a single mother with her daughter right in the store without even realizing who was watching. But the denouement of this meeting was a real shock for her. Subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The soft light of dawn seeped through the thin curtains of a small, modest apartment. The gentle hum of the city awakening outside mixed with the distant sounds of passing cars and the occasional chirping of birds. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of freshly brewed tea and the warmth of a simple, homely life. The apartment was tiny, the paint on the walls slightly cracked with age, and the furniture well worn, but kept impeccably clean. Every object spoke of care, of necessity, and of a life built not on luxury, but on effort and love. Amelia stirred awake on the worn-out couch that doubled as her bed. She stretched slowly, her body aching from the long night shift she had finished only a few hours ago. Exhaustion weighed on her limbs, but she pushed it aside as she always did. She had no time for fatigue. Her daughter, Sophia, needed her. The thought of her little girl was always enough to shake off the heaviness of sleep. Amelia rubbed her eyes and for a moment allowed herself a breath of stillness. A soft shuffle broke the silence, followed by the tiny patter of bare feet against the wooden floor. "Mommy!" a small, joyful voice chimed. Amelia turned just in time to catch Sophia as she sprinted forward and launched herself into her mother's arms. The little girl, barely 6 years old, clung tightly, her face warm against Amelia's chest. Amelia felt her heart swell as she pressed a kiss to the soft curls on her daughter's head. "Good morning, sweetheart," Amelia said softly, her voice still rough from sleep but full of tenderness. "Good morning," Sophia replied, her face bright with a toothy grin. "Did you work again last night?" Amelia paused briefly before answering, brushing a stray curl from Sophia's forehead. "Yes, baby. But I'm here now, and today is our shopping day. Ready to help me pick out the best groceries?" Sophia's eyes sparkled with excitement. Grocery shopping was an adventure for her. She loved the colors, the smells, the excitement of choosing things for their meals. For Amelia, it was a balancing act, a tightrope walk between what they needed and what they could afford. But she never let Sophia see the strain behind her smile. They shared a simple breakfast, oatmeal with a bit of honey, the last from the jar. Amelia made a mental note to add it to the shopping list, though she wasn't sure if it would fit into their carefully planned budget this time. She washed the dishes quickly, then grabbed her purse, an old but sturdy bag, its leather cracked from years of use. Inside, a neatly folded shopping list and her wallet, holding every precious dollar she had set aside for this trip. The sky was clear as they stepped outside, the sun casting a golden hue over the cracked sidewalks. The neighborhood was old and worn, like the apartment buildings with their peeling paint and rusted fire escapes. Children played on the weathered swings of a small playground, their laughter filling the air. Sophia waved to a friend from school before taking Amelia's hand. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor," Sophia announced suddenly as they walked. "Then I can help you when you're tired." Amelia's steps slowed and her eyes softened. She looked down at her daughter's bright, determined face and felt her throat tighten. "You'll be the best doctor," she said with conviction, "and I'll always be your biggest fan." The supermarket loomed ahead, its bright red sign flickering slightly. Inside, the air was cool, and the familiar melody of soft background music played above the hum of carts and the buzz of conversations. Sophia gripped the handle of their cart excitedly as they entered. The aisles were a blend of vibrant colors and tempting displays, but Amelia's path was clear. She guided Sophia first to the fresh produce section, where she began her careful selection, checking prices, weighing options, and mentally calculating totals. Apples were too expensive today, but bananas were on sale. Sophia's eyes lit up as she reached for a single bright yellow banana. "Can we get this one, Mommy?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Amelia hesitated briefly. It was such a small thing, but every penny counted. Yet she couldn't bring herself to deny Sophia this simple joy. She smiled and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. Just one, okay?" Sophia beamed and placed the banana carefully in the cart as though it were a treasure. Their cart slowly filled with basics: rice, pasta, beans, a loaf of bread, and a small pack of chicken thighs marked down for quick sale. Amelia's eyes flicked constantly between the prices and her list. She passed the shelves of snacks and sweets without slowing. Those were luxuries they couldn't afford. As they moved through the store, Sophia's excitement remained undimmed. She loved helping Amelia place items into the cart, proudly selecting a small bag of potatoes from the discount bin and carrying it with both hands. But Amelia felt the familiar weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. She knew their budget down to the last cent. There would be no room for anything extra today. She thought briefly about her next paycheck and the looming utility bills. Every purchase felt like a calculation, a careful compromise between today's needs and tomorrow's uncertainty. At one point, they passed a display of honey. Amelia slowed, her fingers grazing the glass jar. The price was higher than she remembered. She weighed it in her hand for a long moment before quietly placing it back on the shelf. Maybe next time. The store buzzed with life around them, families shopping leisurely, couples debating dinner plans, and children begging for treats. Amelia felt the familiar pang of comparison, but quickly buried it. She had Sophia, and they had each other. That was enough. They turned into the aisle with cereal, and Sophia's eyes lit up at the colorful boxes, each adorned with smiling mascots. She reached for one, bright and cheerful, but Amelia gently guided her hand to a simpler, store-brand box. "This one's better for us, honey," she said softly. Sophia didn't argue. She nodded, understanding in her innocent way that her mother always chose what was best. As Amelia reached for the box, however, a sharp sound broke the air, the clatter of expensive heels against polished tiles. It was a sound Amelia instinctively recognized, one that often accompanied a presence that didn't belong to her world. The sound approached, growing louder, and with it an air of cold superiority. Amelia felt it before she saw it, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the flicker of eyes turning toward them. And then, from behind, a voice laced with something sharp and disdainful. "Well," the voice said, dripping with mockery, "some people really will do anything to scrape by, won't they?" Amelia's spine stiffened, her body tensing protectively beside her daughter. Sophia, sensing the change, glanced up with wide, questioning eyes. The shadow of confrontation had fallen over their modest peace, and the day, which had begun with such warmth, was about to take a colder turn. The sharp sound of heels tapping against the polished tile floor seemed to echo louder than the soft hum of conversations and the rhythmic squeak of shopping carts. The air, once filled with the cozy familiarity of grocery shopping, now felt tense, as if something cold had slipped into the warmth. Amelia, her hand still resting on the store-brand cereal box, felt a ripple of unease crawl up her spine. Beside her, Sophia's small fingers clutched the edge of the cart. Her bright, curious eyes turned toward the source of the sound, her smile faltering as she felt her mother's sudden stillness. A woman stood a few feet away, her presence as sharp and cutting as the click of her designer heels. She was the embodiment of wealth and superiority, meticulously dressed in an outfit that looked as though it belonged on a runway rather than a grocery store. A tailored ivory blazer hugged her figure, paired with trousers so pristine they seemed to repel even the thought of dust. A quilted leather handbag, unmistakably from a luxury brand, hung from her arm, and diamond studs glinted coldly from her ears. Her face, though framed with an elegance born from wealth and privilege, was marred by the unmistakable curl of disdain at the corner of her lips. She held a jar of imported olives in her manicured hand, the label foreign, the price steep, a purchase made without thought or care. But it was the eyes that pierced the air, the cold, assessing gaze that swept over Amelia and Sophia, stripping them down to a single, silent judgment. "Well," the woman said, her voice smooth but laced with something venomous, "some people really will do anything to scrape by, won't they?" The words, though spoken lightly, landed heavily. The air seemed to still. A few heads turned from nearby aisles, furtive glances, curious whispers. Amelia felt the heat rise to her face. Her fingers tensed around the cereal box, but her voice remained steady, her composure unshaken. "We're just shopping," she said, her tone firm but calm. The woman's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Shopping," she echoed, drawing the word out with a syrupy condescension. Her gaze flicked pointedly to their cart, plain, practical staples, the single banana resting on top like a symbol of meager indulgence. "Isn't it precious?" she continued, teaching the little one to reach for the bargain bin. "A valuable life lesson, I suppose." Sophia's small face crinkled in confusion. She tugged lightly on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered softly, her voice innocent, but her words slicing through the air. "Why is that lady being mean?" Amelia's heart broke a little in that moment. She crouched down, her hands resting gently on Sophia's shoulders, and met her daughter's wide, questioning eyes. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people say unkind things because they don't understand. But we don't let it bother us, do we?" Sophia, still puzzled but trusting, shook her head. "No, Mommy," she said quietly. The exchange, so simple and pure, did nothing to soften the woman's expression. Instead, she let out a light, cold laugh. "Teaching her to settle for less," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Well, I suppose it's practical. After all, some people never move beyond the bargain shelves." Amelia felt a flicker of anger spark beneath her ribs, but she kept it contained, banked beneath the calm surface. She stood slowly, her back straight, her eyes meeting the woman's with a steady, unflinching gaze. But the woman wasn't finished. She tilted her head, the diamond bracelet on her wrist catching the overhead lights in a sharp, fleeting glint. "It's always the same story," she said, loud enough for the other shoppers to hear. "People who claim they work hard but somehow never manage to get anywhere. Maybe if you put in a little more effort, you wouldn't be scraping for coupons and store brands." A hush seemed to settle over the aisle. Nearby shoppers, sensing the tension, exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, but no one stepped forward. Amelia felt Sophia's small hand slip into hers, warm and trusting. She squeezed it gently, feeling the pulse of her daughter's heartbeat against her palm. "I work plenty hard," she said, her voice low but clear. "And I'm teaching my daughter something you'll never understand: how to live with dignity." The woman's lips thinned, the corners twitching briefly in something that almost resembled amusement. "Dignity?" she said with a chuckle, her eyes sweeping Amelia's worn jeans, her simple shoes, the faint fatigue shadowing her face. Is that what they call it now? Sophia's grip tightened. My mommy works very hard, she said suddenly, her small voice rising with unfiltered pride and defiance. She's the best mommy in the world. The child's proclamation, pure and unguarded, seemed to ripple through the space, breaking against the cold front of the woman's indifference. A few shoppers paused longer, their expressions shifting, sympathy in some, discomfort in others. A mother with a toddler in her cart frowned disapprovingly at the woman's words. An older man by the canned goods aisle shook his head slightly, his lips pressed in a thin line. Yet no one spoke aloud. The woman's smile never faded, but it sharpened. Sweet, she said, her voice like polished glass, cold and smooth. But life, darling, she directed this pointedly to Sophia, isn't about being sweet. It's about being successful, and success isn't found digging through clearance shelves. Amelia felt the anger rise again, hot and bitter on her tongue. But she would not give this woman what she wanted. A reaction, a scene, a loss of control. With every ounce of restraint, she said simply, "We'll let our lives speak for themselves." Without waiting for a reply, she turned the cart, her arm guiding Sophia protectively, and began to walk away. But behind her, she heard the woman's voice again, a final barb thrown for the audience. "Yes," she called out lightly, "run along. It's always easier to walk away when you know your place." Amelia's steps slowed for a breath, just a fraction, but she did not turn back. Instead, she pressed forward, her heart pounding not with shame, but with something stronger, resolve. As they rounded the corner of the aisle, Sophia looked up, her eyes searching her mother's face. "Did we do something bad, Mommy?" she asked softly. Amelia knelt once more, brushing her thumb against her daughter's cheek. "No, my love," she said, her voice firm and full of warmth. "We did something good. We stayed true to who we are, and that's something no one can take from us." But as they continued their shopping, Amelia felt the weight of the encounter settle on her chest. She wasn't upset for herself. No, she had endured far worse slights in her life. But for Sophia, for the innocence of her child being touched by the cold shadow of cruelty, this was what stung. Yet, beyond the sting, a resolve burned quietly. She would not let Sophia grow up believing that worth was measured by wealth or that kindness was a weakness. They moved through the store, and though Amelia's heart was heavy, her back was straight. She passed the shelves with the expensive honey without a second glance, her eyes forward, her mind clear. She would give Sophia the richest inheritance of all: dignity, compassion, and strength. Behind them, the echo of sharp heels faded into the background, the sting of cruel words becoming nothing more than noise in a world that Amelia knew could never define her or her daughter. But what Amelia did not know was that someone else had been watching, and the story that had begun with coldness and cruelty was far from over. The tension of the confrontation still clung to Amelia's skin as she turned into the next aisle, her heart beating with a stubborn mix of anger and resolve. Sophia remained close by her side, her small hand gripping the edge of the cart as if holding on to her mother's strength. Amelia forced her breath to steady, her fingers tight on the handle as she pushed forward, refusing to let the bitter sting of the encounter linger any longer than necessary. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cool glow over rows of canned goods, their labels neatly stacked in repeating patterns. Amelia's eyes scanned the prices automatically, her mind calculating, every cent accounted for, every choice deliberate. She picked up a can of tomatoes, store brand, and placed it into the cart. "Mommy?" Sophia's soft voice broke through. "That lady was so mean. Why didn't you tell her to stop?" Amelia paused, her hand brushing lightly through her daughter's curls. "Because, my love," she said, keeping her voice gentle but firm, "people like that want to see you get angry. They want to make you feel small, but we don't let them. We show them that their words can't change who we are." Sophia nodded slowly, her brows knitting in thought. "So, being strong means being kind too?" Amelia's chest ached with love for her daughter's innocent wisdom. "Exactly," she replied softly. "Kindness is the strongest thing you can have." They moved further down the aisle, the sharp edge of the earlier encounter dulling as they focused once more on their careful selections. Yet, unseen by them, their interaction had not gone unnoticed. Across the store, a man stood near the entrance of the produce section, his gaze fixed in their direction. His presence commanded attention, though his appearance was deceptively understated. Tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed dark hair touched lightly with silver, he exuded a quiet authority. He wore no suit, no tie, just a well-fitted jacket over a simple shirt and slacks. But there was something unmistakably distinguished about him, something in the way people subtly parted around him without him asking. This was Robert Carlyle. The Robert Carlyle, billionaire, philanthropist, and the owner of this very supermarket chain. Yet few in the store recognized him. He preferred it that way. He often visited his stores without announcement, observing them not through the polished lens of reports and presentations, but through the raw, unfiltered reality of everyday shoppers. And what he had just witnessed had stopped him cold. His sharp eyes, honed by decades of leadership, had caught the entire exchange from the previous aisle. He had seen the woman's cruelty, the cold dismissal wrapped in polished words and expensive fabric. But more importantly, he had seen Amelia. He had seen the strength in her poise, the grace in her restraint, and the quiet fire behind her eyes. He had seen her protect her daughter with dignity, refusing to be drawn into the mud of arrogance and venom. Robert's jaw tightened as he watched the figure of the wealthy woman retreating down the opposite aisle, her heels still clicking in that sharp, dismissive rhythm. He felt the familiar churn of disgust in his chest. He had encountered her kind too many times in his life, the sort who mistook wealth for worth and cruelty for power. But it wasn't the woman's arrogance that kept his attention. It was Amelia and Sophia who lingered in his thoughts as they continued their quiet, careful shopping. The simplicity of their choices, the care in Amelia's every movement, and the protective warmth with which she had handled her daughter's confusion. It all struck a chord that resonated somewhere deep and personal within him. Without fully realizing it, Robert began to follow their path through the aisles, keeping his distance, observing without intruding. He watched as Amelia bypassed luxuries without a glance, her choices focused solely on essentials. He noticed when she paused briefly in front of the honey, her fingers brushing the glass jar for a moment before she gently set it back, her eyes calculating and deciding that today it was a luxury they could not afford. That simple, fleeting moment told him more about her life than any conversation could. Robert's thoughts briefly drifted back, far back to a life he rarely spoke of. He hadn't always been the Robert Carlyle whose name opened doors and filled headlines. There was a time, long ago, when his mother had stood in those same aisles, her hands hesitating over essentials, her back straight against judgmental stares. He remembered the empty shelves, the long nights, and the quiet sacrifices that were never spoken aloud, but felt in every meal shared and every bill paid. The woman he was watching, this Amelia, stood like an echo of his past, and echoes, he had learned, often carried truths worth listening to. The sudden buzz of his phone in his pocket broke his thoughts. He pulled it out, a text lighting the screen from his assistant, reminding him of his afternoon meeting across town. Important deals, high-level discussions, the type of world-shifting decisions that men like him made daily. But his thumb hovered over the screen. Instead, his gaze turned back toward the aisle where Amelia and Sophia had disappeared. "Not today," he muttered under his breath. With a swift motion, he silenced his phone and began walking, not toward the exit, but in the direction they had gone. As he rounded the corner, he saw them near the checkout. Amelia was methodically unloading their carefully chosen groceries onto the conveyor belt: rice, beans, milk, chicken, the single banana, and Sophia, standing beside her, watched each item move forward with a child's quiet fascination. But it wasn't the groceries that caught Robert's attention. It was the expression on Amelia's face. Not sadness, not self-pity, but focus. A quiet, practiced calculation. He could almost hear her mental math as she watched the register tally, her hands hovering near her wallet, ready to make adjustments if the total crept too high. The cashier, a young woman with a friendly smile, scanned each item with the steady rhythm of someone used to the pace of the store's busiest hours. "That'll be $52.36, she announced. Amelia opened her wallet and began counting bills with calm precision. But Robert, standing just a few feet away now, noticed the briefest flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a quick calculation of what remained versus what might be needed before the next paycheck. And then, before she could hand over the money, Robert stepped forward. "Let me cover that," he said, his voice smooth but firm. Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. Confusion flickered there, followed quickly by guardedness. "No," she said immediately, her voice polite but resolute. "Thank you, but I can manage." Robert smiled slightly, but there was something in his gaze, something steady and respectful. "I know you can," he said. "That's not why I'm offering." Amelia's grip on her wallet tightened. Pride, earned, fierce, and unshakable, flashed in her eyes. "I don't take charity," she said softly, her tone carrying a weight that dared anyone to challenge it. Robert inclined his head, his expression thoughtful. "Good," he replied simply, "because this isn't charity. It's recognition." Amelia's brows knit, uncertainty flickering. Recognition for what? "For showing more grace and strength in 5 minutes," he said, "than most people manage in a lifetime." Before Amelia could respond, he reached into his pocket, not for his wallet, but for something far more valuable. A sleek, gold-edged card. He held it out to her. "This is a store pass," he explained, "for preferred customers. It offers special discounts, promotions, and, most importantly, a bit more room to breathe." Amelia hesitated, her eyes flicking between the card and his face. "Why?" she asked, a single word carrying a world of meaning. "Because people like you," Robert said, his voice soft but certain, "are the reason stores like mine exist. And because sometimes strength deserves to be recognized." The air seemed to still between them. Around them, the soft noise of the store continued, the beeping of scanners, the murmur of voices. But for a moment, it was only them, and the silent understanding that passed between two people from very different worlds, yet bound by something profoundly the same. At last, Amelia reached out, her fingers closing over the card. "Thank you," she said, and the words, though simple, carried more weight than 1,000 speeches. Sophia, who had watched the entire exchange with wide eyes, suddenly smiled and tugged at her mother's sleeve. "See, Mommy," she said brightly, "kindness is strong." Robert's lips curved into a smile, the warmth reaching his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, meeting Amelia's gaze once more, "it truly is." And with that, the course of their day, and perhaps something far greater, quietly, irrevocably shifted. Amelia felt the weight of the golden-edged card in her palm, its smooth surface cool against her fingertips. She stared at it for a brief moment, the world around her seeming to blur into a soft hum of distant voices and the rhythmic beep of the cash register. The man, Robert, though his name was still unknown to her, stood calmly, his expression open, neither expectant nor patronizing. There was no pity in his eyes, no trace of the condescension she had fought against moments ago. Sophia, her daughter, clung to her side, her wide eyes alight with innocent joy, unaware of the unspoken tension that passed between adults. Amelia felt her daughter's warmth, and, with it, the slow, steady softening of her own defenses. She closed her fingers around the card, not in acceptance but in acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, her voice firm yet layered with something vulnerable beneath it. "Not for the card, but for seeing us." Robert inclined his head, a flicker of something like understanding passing through his eyes. "It's rare," he replied, "to witness such strength paired with such grace." The moment between them settled, and with it, the tension eased. The cashier, who had been watching the exchange with quiet interest, gave Amelia a warm smile and finished bagging the groceries. Amelia paid for her items on her own, then slipped the golden card into her wallet, not as a crutch, but as a token of something far more valuable than a discount: recognition, respect, and perhaps the promise of opportunity. She turned to Sophia, brushing a strand of curls from her daughter's forehead. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" she asked. Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her small hand slipping into Amelia's. "Ready, Mommy." But as they began to move toward the exit, a sharp, familiar voice sliced through the air. "Well, well," came the mocking lilt. "Isn't that something?" Amelia's spine stiffened immediately, her body instinctively shifting to shield Sophia from the voice's source. She turned to find the woman from before, Veronica, standing just beyond the registers, her arms crossed, lips curled into a smirk. The gleam of her diamond bracelet flashed under the bright store lights as she tilted her head in feigned curiosity. "I didn't realize you had such friends in high places," Veronica continued, her voice sugary with false sweetness, but sharpened by an undertone of bitterness. "Is that how it works these days? Humility theater for a little handout?" The quiet murmur of the store shifted. Heads turned. Shoppers, who had been bystanders during the first confrontation, paused once more, their curiosity piqued. Robert, his posture straightening slightly, stepped forward, his eyes cold now, no longer the soft warmth he had shown Amelia and Sophia. "Ma'am," he said, his voice crisp, each word precise, "I'd suggest you choose your next words carefully." Veronica's gaze flicked to him, and the moment recognition dawned in her eyes, her expression faltered, though her arrogance tried to hold. "You," she began, her voice hitching. Robert's eyes, steady and sharp, pinned her in place. "Yes," he said simply, his voice calm, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "Robert Carlyle, owner of this store and every store you've ever shopped in under my name." A ripple passed through the gathering onlookers. Whispers spread quickly, recognition, realization, and a sudden shift in the air. Veronica's mouth opened, then closed, a flicker of unease cracking through her practiced poise. I didn't know, she stammered, her tone losing its edge, growing thinner, more brittle. And that, Robert said, his voice cold as winter glass, is exactly the problem. You didn't know, and yet you judged. You saw someone shopping within their means and decided their worth was beneath yours. You assumed that a smaller cart meant a smaller value as a person. The space between them seemed charged, every word he spoke falling like a hammer. But let me make something clear, he continued, his voice low but resonant, echoing across the silence. Wealth is no measure of character. Compassion is. And character is something Amelia possesses in greater measure than you could ever buy. The crowd, which had gathered closer, now murmured in agreement. Faces, once neutral, now carried visible disapproval toward Veronica. The same people who had remained silent before, too polite, too afraid of causing a scene, now stood witness, and their silence was heavy with judgment. Amelia, who had remained still, felt the tension shift, not onto her, but away from her. She looked down briefly at Sophia, whose eyes were wide, absorbing every moment. Amelia knew this was a lesson her daughter would carry, a lesson about dignity, about cruelty, and about standing firm. Veronica, her composure crumbling, tried to gather her pride. I didn't mean, she began, her voice faltering. It doesn't matter what you meant, Robert cut in, his voice like steel. It matters what you did, and it matters that a child saw it. His gaze flicked briefly to Sophia before returning to Veronica. You had a chance to be better, and you chose otherwise. The color drained from Veronica's face, her confidence shattered under the sheer weight of her exposure. She faltered, her voice cracking into something small and unfamiliar. Shame. Without another word, she turned, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor as she hurried from the store, her presence retreating as quickly as it had struck. A beat of silence followed her departure. Then, slowly, the sounds of the store returned, beeping scanners, soft conversations, the rustle of bags. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the air. A woman nearby, holding a toddler in her cart, smiled softly at Amelia and said, "Good for you." The cashier, still at her station, offered a quiet, "You handled that with more grace than most ever could." The older man from the canned goods aisle gave Amelia a respectful nod as he passed, his eyes warm with approval. But Amelia, though she felt the shift around her, kept her gaze where it mattered most, on Sophia. Her daughter's eyes, wide with understanding, met hers. "See, Mommy?" Sophia said softly, her voice full of wonder. "You were strong. You didn't need to be loud. You were strong the whole time." Amelia's throat tightened. She crouched to her daughter's level and placed a gentle hand on her cheek. "Being strong," she said softly, "isn't about fighting. It's about knowing who you are and never letting anyone change that." Sophia smiled, a bright, pure smile that seemed to fill every corner of Amelia's heart. Robert, watching the exchange, felt a rare warmth settle in his chest. It was a feeling he cherished, the reminder of why he had built what he had, not for wealth, not for power, but for people, for the lives that moved unseen through the world, carrying burdens the privileged rarely understood. As Amelia straightened, Robert met her gaze once more. "Amelia," he said, his voice gentler now, "I have another opportunity, one I think you might be perfect for." Amelia's brows lifted slightly. "Opportunity?" she echoed, cautious but listening. "At my foundation," Robert explained, "we run a community initiative and we're expanding it. We need someone with real experience, someone who understands people, who understands dignity. Someone like you." Amelia blinked, her guarded expression slipping into something raw and surprised. She hesitated, her voice soft with disbelief. I'm not sure You are, Robert interrupted, his voice firm but kind. I've seen it. Today I saw it. And, he added, his smile tilting warmly, the position comes with a significant salary increase and flexible hours, so you can be home with Sophia. Amelia felt the floor shift beneath her, not from fear, but from possibility. Real, tangible possibility. Her heart pounded, and her eyes, for a moment, threatened to blur. She felt Sophia's small hand squeeze hers. Her voice, when it came, was soft but certain. I'd love to be a part of it. Robert's smile deepened. Good, he said simply. Welcome aboard. The moment, profound in its simplicity, settled like sunlight breaking through a clouded sky. As Robert turned to leave, giving them space, Amelia felt Sophia tug on her hand. Mommy, she asked, her voice bright with innocence and hope, can we still get the honey next time? Amelia laughed softly, her heart full, her eyes warm. Yes, baby, she said, brushing a kiss against her daughter's forehead. Next time, we'll get the honey. They left the store hand in hand, stepping out into the golden afternoon, where the warmth of the sun matched the fullness in Amelia's heart. Behind them, the echoes of the day remained, not in the sharp clicks of heels or cold words spoken in cruelty, but in the silent lessons left behind. And as for Veronica, perhaps for the first time in a long while, she had something real to think about. Perhaps, just perhaps, the mirror that Robert Carlyle had held before her would linger longer than her wounded pride. But Amelia did not walk with the weight of Veronica's shame. She walked with the fullness of her daughter's pride, the promise of a new beginning, and the unshakable strength of knowing that dignity, once kept, was the richest treasure of all. And Sophia, skipping lightly beside her, carried something just as precious, a lesson not in wealth, but in worth. A lesson in what it truly meant to be strong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful and inspiring tales. Share this video with your friends to spread the message, and check out our other videos for more stories that will move and inspire you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.